Welcome to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast where seeing things differently inspires limitless possibilities. This podcast is being brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Limitless was created in order to inform, educate, entertain, and share stories from within the blind and partially sighted community in order to show the world that the opportunities for those who are blind or partially sighted are truly limitless. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your host, the Executive Director and Founder of Blind Beginnings, Shawn Marcellet.
Welcome back to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Marcellet. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I am excited to welcome Jinnie back to the podcast. Welcome, Jinnie.
Thanks, Shawn. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about your journey to get a guide dog. And I'm so excited to hear some of the details of what this process has been like for you. So maybe first of all, introduce your guide dog. What's their name and how old are they? What kind of dog? Tell us a little bit about your dog.
Yeah, okay. So I have a 3-year-old guide dog named Sadie. She looks like a black lab, but she is a Labrador and Golden Retriever cross. So she has that very loud bark. And I actually got her in this past April, so April of 2021.
Now, you went to get a dog during COVID, and where, you haven't actually told us, where did you have to go to get your dog?
Yeah, so I can give a bit of background on why all about that. So I went to the Seeing Eye, which was actually one of the first guide dog schools or Seeing Eye dog schools to open up, and it's located in Morristown, New Jersey. Originally, I wanted to apply to 3 different schools, but I really found that the Seeing Eye fit for me, and that's probably something that we'll get into a bit later as well. And when I sent my application was almost a year ago to April, so in March of 2020. And it took me a year, just a year to kind of get accepted into the program. And I wanted a guide dog since I was in high school. But in order to have a guide dog, you have to have really strong cane skills, so really strong orientation and mobility skills, which once we talk more about training, that will get explained as to why you need those. And in high school, my parents just didn't think I was ready, and people just didn't think I was as ready. And, I did have a lot of things to work on. And even when I was first applying last year, I didn't think I was as ready until my O&M instructor kind of said, you know what, you're actually looking pretty good. So it takes a while to get the guide dog. So it definitely takes a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it took me a year or two when I applied until I actually went to training. So my training was only 2 weeks. I went to Guide Dogs for the Blind. How long was your training?
Yeah, so Guide Dogs for the Blind was actually on my list. And the Seeing Eye trains you for 3.5 weeks, I believe, if you're a new dog guide user. But if you're coming back for your successor dog, you don't have to stay that extra week. So you go home a bit early. And the extra week is specifically for new trains.
Okay. And so flying to New Jersey during COVID, what did they do to sort of protect everybody from each other? You're all coming from different places, I'm guessing, around North America?
Yes. So Seeing Eye accepts students from the States and Canada. Actually, they weren't accepting students from Canada for a while. And actually, me and one other student in April came from Canada. And we were actually the first ones to go back when they were accepting Canadian students. So we were actually kind of like the guinea pigs to see how things would go. And there was a lot of unknowns. So, having to look up that you're testing, having to look up things like that. The good thing was that I was generous enough to pay for our 2-week hotel quarantine and meals. And we stayed in a hotel near campus. And then when we came back, we actually didn't have to quarantine. We applied for an exemption. We just had to quarantine at home, not in a hotel. So we did that. But flying there was actually not as difficult as I thought, because you still got assistance on and off the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really have any problems. Just the only thing was, once you kind of hit the border crossing, so once we were flying into New Jersey, then they just kind of, looked at your tests, your COVID test, looked at your paperwork. On the way back, though, it was a bit more of an issue, because rather than having a layover in the States and then finally landing in Vancouver where they would look at our paperwork, we actually went through Montreal. So we actually missed, me and this other student, we missed our flight from Montreal to Vancouver because of the COVID delays, which did kind of stress me out, because I was traveling with a new guide dog, and now we had to wait for 5 hours in an airport. But other than that, the flying wasn't actually the hard part.
Yeah. I know how stressful that is with, you need to relieve the dog, and now you're stuck in an airport, and there are relieving spots in the airport, which is very interesting. But my dog at least didn't want to use that fake grass.
She didn't either. She went outside, and also her food was in my suitcase, which was still checked under, right? So it was like, what do I feed her? So just like those things that you never really think about, because you've had a cane, you can just fold it up and put it in your backpack. So it was like I was like immediately kind of thrown into things when I was heading back.
Dog.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about the training. What's training like? 3 weeks, everything you need to know about a guide dog. What do you learn?
Yeah, so I'll kind of break it down. So the first 2 days, you don't even get your dog. You're working with the instructor, and then you get your dog on the 3rd day. And the first 2 weeks you're working on 2 specific routes in Morristown. One is a little bit harder, one is not. And then the last week is called freelance. So that's something where you get to kind of choose what you want to do based on your home lifestyle. So backing it up to the beginning. So like I said, for the first 2 days, you don't meet your dog. That is because you're practicing the route that you're going to take with the dog by doing a Juno walk with your instructor. So a Juno walk is when the instructor takes a guide dog harness and they hold it from the front, so kind of simulating that feeling of the dog, and you kind of hold the other end and they just walk. So that gives you a chance to practice right hand turns, how to stop and go, how to correct the dog if they're getting distracted without actually having to worry about the dog being there. And it also gives you a chance to get a feel for the route, because when you get your dog, you're going to be the one directing them on that route, contrary to misconceptions that people have.
I mean, I remember the first time I did a Juno walk, like after being used to having your cane touching the ground in front of you where you're walking. What was that like for you to be sort of you almost feel like you're being, I don't want to say dragged, but a little bit like you're being pulled along, and you can't feel the ground because you're just holding on to the harness of your dog.
Yeah, that is actually very strange, because was so used to feeling cracks and dips in the sidewalks and things. The first time I did a Juno walk, we were flying, because with a dog, you are kind of walking a bit faster. And if, I didn't have to kind of stop and start with my cane getting caught in things, I'm a much more quicker traveler. But there was an incident, actually, the last day of class, where I fell. And, this happens to the best of us. This isn't anything to do with guide dogs, just simply because my toe got caught in the crack of a sidewalk, because I just didn't place my foot right. But whereas if I had my cane probably would have gotten caught in that. And no, I have not really fallen since, so that's good.
That's good.
But you know, there's little things that you're like, oh right, I forgot that I have to actually get used to that now. Those things, and then yeah. So going back to the way training works. On the third day, you get your dog, and that kind of gives also the instructors a chance to finalize what dog they're going to match with you, because dogs are given to, they call us clients, based on the speed that they walk, based on temperament and lifestyle, based on the pull. So the pull is how hard the dog's kind of pulling the harness. Like if you grab a jump rope and you pull it taut and someone's pulling the other end, that's kind of what we describe as pull. And because we were students during a pandemic, I actually never got an instructor to come look at my home area and test those things with me. So I gave them a video. So for them, those 2 extra days were very, very important for the for that. And then on Wednesday morning, we got our dogs. You're given about 10 minutes to just kind of hang out with them because they are highly bonded to their trainer. And in the afternoon is when we actually went and did our first walk with the dogs. And then, so that was a Wednesday. And then the following Sunday is what we call a solo. So you do the first route and you do it by yourself with your dog, and the instructor just follows. And during that route, you will have another instructor, and they had a poodle, and they were kind of set up to be a dog distraction for your dog. So you kind of learn how to correct your dog if they distract. We had an instructor set up a barricade. So if something's blocking the sidewalk, your dog has to take you into the road and kind of walk you around it. The seeing eye also does what we call traffic checks. So if you're walking and a car is backing out of the driveway, your dog is taught to stop immediately. Or if you're crossing the street, but the car turns in front of you, your dog is taught to stop. So those were also things we had to do on the route as well. Same for the second route, just more of dog distractions and all that. And then we did freelance. So I actually went to a university campus because I'm a student. I wanted to do that. I did escalators with my dogs, which I actually really don't like escalators, but it was quite easy to do. Revolving doors, just things like that.
It's funny you're mentioning some of the in my training, the dog distractions. We had lots of practice with that, actually getting on and off the bus that we took every day to go in. So I was in Oregon, so we would go into Portland to do training. But yeah, the other trainers would bring their pet dogs to be the dog distractions. They would take turns bringing a dog, and we'd have to like walk our dog towards the bus, and then their dog would be there to distract, to practice. And we also had the instructor kind of be the car pulling out unexpectedly. I remember how scary that was.
That was
okay. I've never done this before. You're telling me this is going to happen, and I'm just hoping that my dog is paying attention and knows how to stop and do what it's supposed to, right? Like, pretty freaky.
It was definitely interesting because I was like, is she going to stop? And they're like, oh yeah, she'll stop. But they tap you on the shoulder when it's going to happen. One time my dog thought she was very smart. So when the car actually did kind of turn in front of us, she tried to go around it. So that was kind of like her only thing. So what they do in that instance is they take a rolled up newspaper and kind of boop the dog on the nose, because that is kind of one of their sensitive areas, to kind of let them know, oh, you got a little bit too close here. So she did kind of get booped on the nose a little bit, to kind of let her know that, oh yeah, that was a bit too close. And yeah, also they had pet dogs there too. There was a poodle named Mocha, a poodle named Taylor. They also have 2 cats named Nash and Crosby, who live on the premises as cat distractions as well. Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, personally, what was training like for you? Was it easy? Was it hard? How was it?
So there's a lot of misconception about training being this amazing, wonderful, fun time, which it is. But no one ever talks about how hard and draining training is, because you're working so we got up at 5:30 in the morning to feed and park, which we call relieving, the term for relieving our dogs, all the way to like 9. So we worked like a full day with our dogs. And after that, you're just so exhausted because, some days would be better than others. Some days wouldn't. These dogs are still bonded to their trainers. Sometimes they don't want to listen to us. I remember heeling Sadie down the hallway. She didn't want to listen to me. She didn't know who I was. She was like, why should I work for you? And, I definitely cried at some points because it was like, I felt like this dog just didn't want to work for me, which wasn't the case. Now she loves working for me. It's just, you have to let that bond develop, which actually doesn't even develop for 6 months to a year. That's when it's fully formed and fully developed. And some days would be really, really great. Like so they take you to New York City if you want to go during freelance. And I definitely wanted to go. And they say if your guide dog can guide you through New York, they can make it anywhere. And she was incredible in the city. So, there was good days and bad days, but it was definitely draining, especially because I had been there already 2 extra weeks. So over a month. And some of us who had to quarantine, we were very close already, which kind of helped the class bonding process. But I noticed that some of us were just so tired more than others, because for us, it's like, we just want to go home. It gets exhausting after a while, but there was definitely great things about it.
Oh, I remember how tired I was too. I thought that I would work in the evenings, and
me too.
I could not really accomplish very much because and plus for me, I was afraid of dogs. So
me too.
I was, adjusting to trying not to be terrified of this animal that was with me all the time.
Ever since I was young, I was actually very, very afraid of dogs. And most of my family is very, very afraid of dogs. And meeting friends who have guide dogs definitely helped with that. But I remember when I met Sadie, I thought she was going to jump on me. She gets excited, or, they'll put their mouth on you just to kind of play. Like, that is their way of playing. But those things really scared me at first. Or brushing her teeth even. Like, I did not want to do that. I was so terrified of even doing that. And the first time I had to treat her out of my hand for clicker training. So you use this thing, you click it, they associate that to they're getting a treat. That took me a couple days to actually learn because I was so scared.
Oh, that was the first thing they had us do, was give her a treat. I give my dog a treat so that she would, bond to me or help that process anyways. And I felt her mouth on my hand, and I totally started crying as soon as I met her. So I understand. It was, when a dog is in harness, they're trained to be very well behaved. That's when they aren't going to jump up. Usually they're going to be more reserved,
calm, and reserved.
Except when they're your guide dog, you don't keep them in harness all the time.
You don't.
You take them out of harness, and you're supposed to play with them and have fun with them and let them be a dog. And those were the times when I was the most afraid, because she would get excited and maybe she barked at me, which I was she hates me. She's mad at me. But actually she was just playing and saying hi. Yeah. So it was hard. Yeah.
Or if you're playing tug with them, sometimes their teeth will touch your hand. At first that terrified me. I was like, oh my goodness, like her teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have taught her not to put my arm in her mouth. That's just something I personally don't like.
Mm-hmm.
But she is definitely very high strung. Like, I compare her a lot to your dog because I think they are quite similar in energy level.
Yeah, my condolences on that. You mentioned going to New York. I think my moment when I've never been able to see in the dark, and I have a little bit of vision in the daylight. So traveling at night was always a little bit more challenging. And we did a night route, and that was sort of the first moment when I was super impressed with like how confident I felt being guided.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just went really well. So it was very emotional. It was very up and down. Right. And how 100%. You described, some days were tough. Some days there were moments where it was amazing and moments where it was really hard, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. And some days it even felt like, is this something that you question yourself? You're like, is this a good decision that I made? Right. Because you're so in that emotional state. You're like, I just don't want this. And right? And that's where it's really hard. And that's why I was saying, like, you really have to be sure that this is something that you want and that you have the skills for mobility, because when you have a cane, you can, look around more to see what's around. When you just have a dog, you kind of have to sense when the buildings are coming up and sense, where you're supposed to be turning, et cetera, et cetera. So that was, even in that too, was a challenge.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think the longer you've been working with a cane, the more you might doubt that decision while you're there. Like we're used to what we're used to, right? We're comfortable with what we know. And so when it's hard, when it's something new and it's hard, then you're kind of like, oh, am I making a mistake? Is this the right thing? Maybe I don't know. And so and doubting yourself throughout this really challenging training period adds to the exhaustion, I think.
It really does. And I think that's the thing people don't talk about. And also, like, me and, like I said, the other student from Canada, we're the youngest ones in our class. So I am 21 and she was also my age. Everyone else was quite older. They were parents. They were, they were veterans, just they were much older. And I think also having that, because some classes will typically be more students because it's in the summer months. And some classes will typically be other types of people, right? And so having me kind of feel like I was the youngest also kind of made me feel a little bit more intimidated, especially because my friend, she owns 3 horses. So she's quite competent with animals. And everyone else was... Actually, no, there was one other student also who was 21 and he was getting his first dog. But other than the 3 of us, everyone else was there for their successor dogs, and everyone else was just so comfortable with dogs. So it just kind of felt a little bit intimidating in that sense as well. Yeah.
My class, there was only 6 of us. It's a smaller school. So 6 is the size of the classes, but 5 of us were getting our first dogs, and only one person was getting her 4th or 5th dog. And the rest of us were getting our first dogs. So it was amazing because we were all going through this for the first time, except this one person who we peppered her with questions the entire time because she had so much experience, but the rest of us could really connect on what we were struggling with, or what, the questions we were dealing with internally, or is this going to work out, or are we going to be successful? And it was kind of cool.
Yeah. The Seeing Eye has 24 students. So 4 students to 1 instructor, but with COVID, they definitely reduced that number. So when I was there was 10 of us, so 2 per instructor. And that meant that one of us would go in the morning, one of us would go in the afternoon. But typically if you had 4, there'd be 2 and 2. I really liked one-on-one. I don't know if I actually would have made it if I had another student working at the same time, especially if they were getting their successor dog. I really liked the one-on-one, and that was definitely feedback I gave to them because everyone gets a chance to do an exit interview once you're done training. And a lot of us seem to like that style as well.
Yeah, ours was 1 trainer to 2 dogs, but we were never out at the same time. So we would travel to wherever we were going for the day together, and then one of us would stay in the building while the other one went for their walk with the trainer, and then we would switch. So it was for the most part one-on-one when you were getting when you were on the road, I guess, or
well, you were training.
Yeah. So did COVID impact like the ability to go into restaurants or malls or university campus or anything like that?
Yeah, so definitely a lot of, like, when we were dining in the dining hall, we were all sitting 6 feet apart. Typically after the first week, they would open it up to more restaurant style. So moving things more into the back area of the dining hall. So you actually had to navigate more as if tables were set up for a restaurant. As well as we never went to a restaurant because of COVID. I think we went to a pizza place to kind of pick up some pizza, and we went to a coffee shop, but not an actual restaurant where you could practice putting your dog under the table in the booth. We did actually go in a mall, which was actually very interesting, because when I'm navigating a mall, I'm hitting all those signs and all those displays and those plants. Whereas with my guide dog, we were just kind of flying through, which was kind of nice in that sense. University campus, we didn't go inside buildings, but we definitely went outside, which was nice. But yeah, not a lot of indoor work due to the pandemic.
So how was that when you came home and had to go to places like that with your dog when you hadn't been able to practice?
Yeah, definitely interesting. I mean, we did practice some stuff, and you definitely can apply it over. But I remember for the first 2 weeks, we didn't go anywhere because of COVID. And then after that, we did, walks around my neighborhood a lot. But then in the summer, not a lot of things were open again. So also, she's not seeing people, so she would work very, very well. I remember the first time I took her into a building was my counseling office, and there was just so many people in the waiting room, and I think she just got very excited. I mean, of course, it doesn't help when they're like, "Oh, you came back, you have a dog now," and everyone's super excited about her. But I remember she jumped on someone the very first time, and I mean, these things. I feel like, guide dog handlers are discouraged to talk about because it's kind of putting a negative reputation for the dog. But these things do happen because they are still dogs at the end of the day. And I did correct her. I gave her a pretty firm leash correction. And I'm glad to say she will try it, but she has learned that is not okay. Now, when we go into counseling, she just lays there under my seat because, she's like, oh, now I'm used to this. This is how it's going to be. And even when I brought her to Blind Beginnings for the first time at the campfire, she was like, oh, my goodness, a big group of people sitting at my level on the ground. She was very overwhelmed. And I remember going home from campfire that day and talking to people and saying, I don't think I made the right decision. But then when I brought her to the screening, she was absolutely fine. And now when I take her into classes, she's absolutely fine. So there's still going to be ups and downs in that first year, regardless of pandemic or not. I do think the pandemic has made it heightened for us, but it's still she's still a dog.
Yeah. And that it is such a transition, and they're still learning and you're still learning, and then you're learning each other. And it was so hard. I only had my dog for a year and 3 months. And when you said it takes 6 months to a year to bond, I was like, oh man, maybe I didn't give it long enough.
Unfortunately, it does. I mean, I can already see our bond happening. She won't stay with anyone else. I mean, she'll try, but she'll try to follow me wherever I go. So I do see it developing. And the good thing about seeing eye is you can call the school at any time. And I did. The first time she jumped up on someone, I called the school. And I think that's also a thing that guide dog handlers sometimes don't maybe realize is you can call your school. You're not a bad guide dog handler for calling your school. That's what they're there for, is to help those issues.
Yeah, definitely.
For when you have a new dog, especially.
Yeah, GDB has that too. And there's also a support line for emotional support if you're struggling, which I was when I brought my dog home. So there's a lot of support for sure. So now that you've been working with a dog for a while, what are your thoughts on cane versus dog?
This is a big one because everyone's been asking me, and even when I went into training. So when I went into training, my trainer is actually a mobility instructor, and that's not often the case, but I really loved it because she would explain things in mobility terms and I would just apply them to the dog, which was really nice. And she kind of still showed me, she's like, cane is not gone, your cane is not less than, you can still integrate it and you can still use it. If you have to leave your dog home for some reason, you still have to use your cane. Whereas I feel like a lot of the time, people separate dog and cane as so black and white about which one's better or worse. And I don't really see that as the case. I mean, there was a time where I left Sadie and took my cane, and that was quite different. I didn't really enjoy it as much because I forgot all the things that used to be in my path. But I think there's just differences, you know, it depends. Do you want to be someone who can walk really quick and go around things and rely more on echolocation? Perfect. A dog might be your choice. Are you someone who really relies on concrete foundational information? Then great, the cane might be for you. But I really don't like it when people, you know, split the two up. Or, you know, when I was younger and I really did like my cane, because, you know, sighted people really didn't understand at the time maybe about how you apply for a guide dog. Just, oh, call the CNIB. You need a guide dog. Get them to get you a guide dog. Like, it isn't really that easy to get one. So,
yeah, there are definitely some things that I found, like, it's easier to get disoriented with the dog, or at least I found that way, because you're not touching what's around you in the same way, and you're moving quick. So you could just be, your angle could just be off a little and you're quickly moving in a direction you did not know you were going. So I actually got lost a few times.
Me too. Body direction is quite important.
Yeah. And once your dog knows the route, no problem. Like, you're good to go. But learning that route, especially if it's one that you don't know yourself, was pretty tough.
Yeah. Like, we have paths in my university. There's paths, but so there's a main path that goes straight down, but then there's paths protruding to the left and the right. So if I'm trying to make, you know, with my cane, I follow the path, follow the grass, and if there's an opening, I just wouldn't take it. With your dog, if you're trying to make a fast beeline straight, sometimes if I just veer a little bit to the left or right, we could be going down the wrong path. So that happens at 9:30.
Or they'll take you to the door of a place because they like to find you doors, because you like it when they find you a door, but it's a door. It's not the right door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely happened a couple times. It's like, no, try again. Not this one. Try again. Yeah.
Yeah. I think patience is definitely needed when sort of learning how to use a guide dog and adjusting to that way of traveling after a long time of using a weight cane.
100%. Also with people as well, right? Because I think a lot of people also think that the guide dog is changing for you, but it's also changing for the people around you, because you're also kind of, this new thing is being brought into their lives as well. Because it's not like, you know, you're going into the restaurant with your cane. It's like, they're like, do I guide you? Where do you walk? Because when you're working with a guide dog, I usually get the person to follow me behind me on my right, because guide dogs do not like anything else on their left. At least Sadie does not, because she walks on my left. So it's also a big adjustment for the people in your life too.
That's interesting. So what is your preferred way of traveling with other people? Would you be guided while you're using your dog, or is it you prefer not to?
I prefer not to, which is actually quite shocking for me, because I you know me, I was very much guide me everywhere, people. And you know, my parents, even if I brought my cane, they'd guide me everywhere. Since I've gotten my dog, I don't remember, I can't count, like I can count on my hand how many times my parents have guided me, and that's a huge step for them.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you know, the relationship, and you know, they are terrified of dogs. It's just part of the culture. But now that my parents pet my dog and love it so much, it's just like this whole other thing. And, you know, I never, you know, Shawn, you know, like, I never took the bus places. Now I take the bus to school, 2 buses to school. Things that, like, you know, people kind of, you know, it's cliche, like, oh, a guide dog changed my life. But I think for me, the guide dog changed my life in the sense of it lets people around me know that, okay, she is capable of doing this. She has a dog. You know, she can do this. And I think that's just huge for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Especially with my family. So
yeah, I do. That's interesting. Just the way people respond. That was one of the things I loved about having a dog, was people seem to have an assumption that if you have a guide dog, you must be a certain level of intelligent and capable and competent.
Exactly.
And they treat you that way, right? So with a white cane, I felt I don't have that experience. I feel like people sort of talk down to you, but with a dog, they talk to me more like an equal, which is something that I really appreciated. And they're also super curious about your dog. So they're there's a conversation starter right off the bat, which isn't there with a cane.
Get grabbed less often too, because you do have an animal with you, which I never liked it when people grab me. And I think it's also because you have to take care of the animal. They see you kind of correcting it. They see you kind of doing those things, which, that kind of shows that, you kind of are able to manage that. And yes, it is a conversation starter. Sometimes, people are curious, and sometimes it's the conversations of, please don't pet my dog and things like that. That has been really hard for me because though I love to advocate, it is really hard for me to advocate in those situations because it feels like I'm going back to the basics of please don't touch my cane. Please don't take my cane. And it feels like you're just kind of doing that with your dog again. So there's, I like not being grabbed, and I love, being seen as this confident person, but then people who kind of pet your dog when you're not looking or call out to your dog and, stuff like that, that definitely does still deter me.
I guess we should maybe, since we're all talking about guide dogs, just sort of refresh people on the rules of what, the etiquette, what to do and not do.
Yeah. So when you see a seeing eye dog or a guide dog in harness, so the body harness that goes on the dog, that symbolizes that the dog is working. So when you put that on your dog, the dog understands that it is work time. So not to pet or engage with the dog. If you want to pet the dog, ask the handler. If the handler says yes, then the handler says yes. If the handler of the guide dog says no, then it's a no. A lot of people, sometimes do this thing where they'll be like, I know I'm not supposed to, but I can't help it. Yeah. And they'll still pet your dog. And that's always really awkward for me. So, please be respectful of that and just make sure you ask. It's just like when you have a newborn baby and someone's really curious, right? You want to protect your baby. Offering food to a guide dog is something that we really don't appreciate, because if a guide dog gets used to having food, human food especially, if they see a donut or something in the street, they might lunge to go get it instead of guiding us, which can often leave us, maybe in an unsafe situation if they're supposed to be walking us around something. Calling out to a guide dog, the guide dog should be focused on its owner and taking directions from us. And often, calling a guide dog, whistling at it, or etc., can take focus away from that. And, otherwise just, ask questions. That's one thing I don't mind is I don't mind if people don't know. I think what bothers me more is if they don't ask. So I'm more than always happy to answer any questions that people have rather than them assume and do something. Like, another thing too is if you want to help us, please use your words. Don't grab the harness handle, because that's just like grabbing the steering wheel out of someone's hand. You don't really want to get in between the dog and its handler.
I was just thinking about, why would somebody say yes or no if you ask to pet their dog? And people, it's not because some people who are blind are nice and some aren't. It really depends on the dog, right? And how they're going to respond. Yeah. How, my dog was so easily distracted that if anybody pet my dog on the SkyTrain, she would not want to come off the train with me. Like, she'd want to stay and hang out with that person. So it was really difficult for me when people would interact with my dog. So I would have to say no. Whereas other people, I've seen them, go ahead, no problem. And the dog will just quickly recover and focus and carry on. Right.
Also depends where you're going, right? If you're in a rush, you might not have time. If you have time, you might even take the harness off. I've done that. Yeah. I've taken the harness off after class to let people pet my dog. So it really depends on the circumstances.
What advice would you give somebody who is maybe considering going to get a guide dog?
Yeah, do a lot of research. There are different training methods and different schools and different things that might work for you that might not work for somebody else, or things that you might not really like. So making sure that you pick a school and training method that works well for you and your needs. Also, strong orientation and mobility skills. I know I keep coming back to that, but that really, really is really important. And being able to walk 2 to 3 routes independently, because when you get that dog, you want to make sure it has work to do. Otherwise, it could get bored or it could lose its training. And, you don't want that. So yeah, just kind of being mindful of those things, and being mindful of whether you should get a guide dog right now, or maybe if it's a decision that you should wait for a couple of years to make.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to have a stable living environment. I think they do say, if you're moving within the first year, it might not be a great idea to get a dog, because then you're learning new routes and the dog's also being uprooted. Because you have to remember, these dogs were born, then they were given to puppy raisers, so people who kind of foster them, and then they're given back to the school to be trained, and then they're given to you. So they bounce from person to person, and you really want to make their life stable as possible.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jinnie. This has been really interesting to learn about your story. And I'm so happy that it's been a positive experience and that you are enjoying working with Sadie.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me and asking me to talk about this.
You've been listening to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. If you have a question, a comment, a future topic request, please send us an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. Please share our podcast with a friend, like, subscribe, and join us next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Music for this podcast is composed by Shawn Bishop and Clement Chow. Production and audio editing by Rob Minot. For more information about Blind Beginnings and the work it does to support children and youth who are blind and partially sighted, along with their families, visit us on the web at www.blindbeginnings.ca, and also remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.